Hello, LinkedIn. Welcome to our weekly episode of Prospective Force Live. We are here and streaming on multiple channels. I hope we don't break anything in the process, but we're certainly going to give it our best shot. And so hope you'll join in. Be sure to let us know where you're joining from. And we also love for you to share comments, questions, in the comments section, because we want you to be a part of our engagement. So look forward to sharing. Anton, you want to kick us off for today?
Yeah, my favorite question to ask at the beginning of the show is where are you joining from? Please type it into the comments so we can give you a shout out. Kevin does a great job with that. But one thing that I'm remembering to do better is introducing ourselves. This is something that we're really bad at, and we assume that everybody, that's watching us knows who we are. Looks like we got some folks joining. Hey, Tim's joining from New York. Olga, hopefully I'm saying your name right. Olga, from Detroit. Welcome, D-Town. But yeah, so who we are, we're Prospective Force. We're a coaching and consulting company really focused on human sustainability. And really what that means is taking care of the human in between the four walls of your organization, and from a complete holistic standpoint, from health, from leadership, from life, and really optimizing them to combat the stress that people have been under. So we've been doing this show for over a year, and we talk about really from HR standpoint, from anything from development to leadership, right? So every Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific, and 5 p.m. Central European time. We've been showing up. So welcome. Thanks for joining. I'm Anton. I'm the CEO of the company. My background's really in health. I've had a good amount of leadership, but really human performance standpoint, transforming people or teams from not performing to performing. Kev, give us your background. Kimberly, give us your background.
Go ahead, Kimberly. Ladies first.
Thank you. As I took a drink of water, Kevin, great timing. So I'm Kimberly, and I work with these guys as a leadership coach or consultant. I come from close to 30 years in corporate as a leader, and my focus really is on making sure that we work to help people identify their true potential, embrace it, and move forward in empowering others. And sometimes I add a little levity to the conversation.
She makes this way more fun. Me and Kevin are so dry and boring, and Kimberly brings the fun.
That's right. Kimberly balances us out. And before I share, want to shout out to Raja Shikar. Appreciate you being here, and welcome, Jander. Glad to have you. Jander's a big support. And Scott, appreciate you being here. And I am the, Chief Operations Officer. Basically, what Anton and Kimberly don't do, I try to fill in and do. And we just work together as a great team to complement each other. We work hard to practice what we preach. And like Kimberly said, we are trying to help people and organizations find out where their potential lies and help develop that so that you can become a functioning organizational ecosystem and are humanly sustainable, because we have a real concern that we're watching the workforce, we're watching organizations that are if in stages of crash and burn, and it's only going to get worse until we can overcome some of these challenges of bringing human back to the workplace. So, Anton, back to you, sir.
Yeah, pop up.
I can do that.
Pop up the PowerPoint. So, guys, today we're going to be talking about culture, and everything we've been talking about, God, I don't know, for the last 20 plus weeks has been stress related, and it's really trying to show the big picture of stress and really helping companies understand how it impacts and how to combat it, but really in all the connected symptoms. And today we're going to talk about culture, and culture can be good for stress, or culture can be bad for stress. Culture can be that, what I call it is a perception lens. Perception lens is everything goes through this lens, everything we do, everything we experience, right? I put in the hard work as an employee, And then the way that our culture is will determine how the stress that's put on me is perceived. And the reality about stress, the way you perceive it is half the battle, because two people can be under equal amounts of stress. But if one has a positive perception of it, meaning that their culture is showing them purpose, their culture's kind of reward-based culture, not from a standpoint of actual rewarding, but feeling rewarded, feeling like you're influential, feeling like you're making a difference, right? More intrinsic rewards. Then that person can take significantly more stress, or from the same amount of stress, they'll have less negative side effects. They can sustain it longer. And the way your culture is set up is ultimately that perception on perception lens. So getting to the agenda, Kev. So we always start with a relevant article, something that we like to talk about. This was just out this morning. And then we'll talk about the 5 components that we believe at Prospective Force are part of, setting a good culture. So it starts with healthy team conflict, making sure that, we'll get into details what that means, managing your turnover. And that doesn't mean stopping turnover. I want to be clear with that, because there's good and bad turnover. Team motivation through aligned values. It's inclusive and diverse ecosystem, and ultimately leaders being a thermostat for your team. And we're going to explain what that is when we get to that slide. But first, let's get into the our first slide here, which is basically, normally we talk about the organizational ecosystem and how stress is trapped inside. Oh, never mind. HR articles first. So,
hey, Anton, shout out. I've got to especially shout out to a friend, Sharon. Sharon has been trying to join us, and also my Wisdom Seeker Live. And she has successfully joined us live, and we're glad to have you, Sharon. So
we got a couple of folks here on my end. One is inviting us to come on some TV show with, DM me. Tim, looking to connect. Guys, DM me and then let's set something up, and then let's talk. If you're ever in the space that we're in, meaning that this is what you do and you create human sustainability of some shape, some form in the organization, DM me. We'd love to have you on the show. We're going to start having guests here pretty soon. So if this is something relevant and you have specific thing you want to talk to, we don't pretend to be experts in everything. We are very much generalists, and we like to put in specialists to really bring the best value, be it to organizations or on our show. And yeah, so DM me, we'll set something up. But so in this one, HR news article of the week, we're talking about as work sites reopen, offices may operate differently than before the pandemic. Whoa, Anton, surprising information here. Nothing new, guys. We all kind of know that. But there was one really cool point that's bullet point number 4 that we'll get here in a second that I really liked from this article, and I want to share it. So some stats. 61% of employees hope to have half or more of their workforce back to the work site by the end of the third quarter of 2021. So more than half looking to get back, back in the building. But what that looks like is going to be different. 80% say they will embrace greater flexibility post-pandemic, with most planning a hybrid on-site remote work model. So that sounds good, but are we putting good thought into what that looks like and how it's going to be successful, especially when it comes to culture? It's very, very easy to lose your culture if your people are not interacting on a regular basis, if there's not relationships being built, if there's not, those human interactions occurring. 56% of employees would consider switching employers if flexibility regarding work location was not an option. So think about it. If you become too rigid when you come out of this pandemic, you could end up losing 56% of your workforce, because there's somebody out there who's going to be in your industry providing the flexibility that you're not. Now, this doesn't mean that you become fully remote or become so flexible that it causes you operational inefficiency. What we're saying is you have to think about, what does this balance look like? And when do I need my people here and when do I not need them? And we use this word all the time, intentionality. If you're having your people come in and be less flexible, you better be certain that the time that they're there is very intentional. For example, if it's a meeting and it should have been an email, don't do that. That's the worst thing you can do, is people losing ability to be flexible for a meeting that you have the whole team there. It's expensive. We know how expensive meetings can be from operational standpoint, but then it's just overview of stuff. There's no, collaboration. There's no decision making. It's just overview. Send them an email, record a video of you presenting a PowerPoint, and they can do that at the freedom of their own time versus putting them into this rigid block of time that creates stress unnecessarily on them. 45% of remote workers want to work in the office between 1 and 3 days per week. So That's an important one too. Your people are not saying, I want to be always remote. They still want to have that interaction, that connection, but they need the flexibility and, once again, the intentionality behind it. And this point was the one that I really like. Offices, this was an interview of a VP of a big HR company. And she said, offices should be for 3 C's. And she focused on those 3 C's: creating, collaborating, and celebrating. If it's one of those 3 things, bring people to the office. If it's something that falls outside of those 3 things, they don't need to be there. It could be remote. I'm not saying we're not having meetings, we're not talking, but they don't need to be physically on location. So what are your guys' thoughts on these stats and just in general, returning back to the workplace?
Kimberly?
I've had several conversations recently with recruiters, with CEOs, with employees. And I think this aligns with how it is. I think a lot of companies are losing good people because they're going to be a little too rigid and want people to come back in the office, and people can work from anywhere remotely. And so the pool of applicants, if you will, is not as regional based as it used to be, because you have the flexibility to do it. The people wanting to work from home or work from the office, a few days per week, I'm hearing that as well. I mean, it is, a lot of people are missing the, camaraderie, the in-person type people events. But there have been places that have been creating, and I really like that last point about for creating, collaborating, and celebrating. There are pockets of teams that have been doing this quite successfully virtually as well. And so if you still have a workforce that only wants to come in between 1 to 3 days per week, you can still create that culture virtually, but you have to think about it a little bit differently. I think what happened in the very beginning, a lot of leaders had the mindset of running a virtual team the same way they did an in-person team, and that did not work.
Well, I got to give a shout out. Welcome to Sukhbir joining us. And yeah, Kimberly, a lot of info there you share is really good. And Anton, and I like to key in on the word balance. I'm here to tell you that if, I am very much about flexibility, work from home. These guys will tell you, if you want to drive me crazy, strap me to a chair in an office somewhere, and I won't last more than about 10 minutes. So I'm all about flexibility and even remote. But that being said, people need people, and we can go virtual, and it's really great. We're glad that we have the option to be on LinkedIn and other platforms virtually. But at the end of the day, if we don't have that human interaction, I don't care who you are, even the most introverted person, you're going to have issues by not having that human interaction. Such a critical piece. And like we always talk about, that's so important, is as a leader, you've got to know what those needs are for your team. You really have to consider how to apply this policy or protocol, whatever you want to call it, for your team. The other piece that I really hope people will consider, organizations especially, is, we look at so often the intended consequences of our policies, our decisions, but we really, really miss so often the unintended consequences. And the whole work from home and remote question is got to really be considered both on the intentional and on the unintentional side. I've gone so far as I co-wrote an article with Tisha Nyhorster about implications of working from home. If you want to read it, it's on LinkedIn on my profile, and it gives a lot of considerations for people to use as you explore this. But as Anton and Kimberly both say, you've got to be intentional with it and not just broad stroke approach. You've got to know your team and know how to make the options available and balance keeping it operationally practical. Being an operations guy, I know that it's more of a challenge when you start customizing, but in the current environment, if you want to keep people and to keep them productive and motivated, you're going to have to learn how to do customizing and make it work operationally.
Yeah, I was going to piggyback on that because the 4 words in that title that I think are so important, offices may operate differently. And I think it's based on what we've been talking about for weeks and weeks and weeks, that an organization, when it was brick and mortar before the pandemic, we truly didn't focus on our team as people. We didn't take the time to connect with them, to find out what was going on in their life. We just kind of made sure that they were working. Now, we might have celebrations, bringing in one of the C's, but you didn't really interact during a celebration. So then we were forced to work from home, over a year now. And I think a lot of leadership skills suffered remotely because they didn't still invest in their team. When the doors open back up and these people now come back, how are you going to lead them? How are you going to interact with them? Are you going to just welcome them back and then have them work in isolation as they did before?
The good old days were not always good old days. That's more of our romantic memory. Well, it was so much better then. Now, I'm sorry, but especially in this case, not necessarily.
We got Josh Fat from Kenya joining. Thank you so much for checking out. Thank you for the compliment, for the interesting topic. Just a little devil's advocate on my part here.
Uh-oh.
As leaders, and this one's tough because we are pushing this message of listen to your people, have your people kind of tell you what their needs are. But I also look at it a little bit like a parent. And sometimes our people don't always, I don't want to say they don't always know what's best for them, but they don't always see the full picture of things. And as leaders, just because people are asking for a certain thing, that does not mean that's the best thing for them or for your culture or for your organization. So your people may be going, we want to be all remote. And this may be possible in your organization. But if you're appeasing that request, you have to consider, what are you giving up? Can you find a way to have culture? Can you find a way for them to have relationships and do all that virtually? The answer may be yes. I'm not saying that it's not. But I just want everybody to be cautious. Don't just do what the people want, because some people want different things. You have to really, as a leader, take the big picture into consideration and realize that you're probably looking at a lot more variables than they are. It's not their job. It's not their job to worry about some of these big picture variables. It's your job. So you have to be careful when doing that.
Well, you might think you're playing devil's advocate, but I agree with you. So, Kevin, you're going to have to come out on the other side of that one. For the simple reason that, and I kind of posted a little bit about it today, alignment and agreement. So as the leader, you gather input, you find out what your employees' needs are, but you're ultimately responsible for making the best decision for your organization and moving it forward. And so what you want to do when you collect information from your staff and their needs is to explain to them why you're going to move in this direction. And so you have them have alignment with it, that they may not agree with it. They wish it were something different, but they can support it. Because you're never going to get to agreement unless you have an office of one person.
Yeah.
We have a great comment from Olga. Olga said, I think when the team is doing what is best for everyone versus what is just good for me, then we can change the whole working environment, become human within the highest potential. Absolutely. And this is where, I'll bring in stress as that component. And this is how we don't consider stress. In organizations, less than 1% of people actually look at stress this way. What is the social ramification for stress impacting people for a longest period of time? You create a scarcity mindset. Scarcity mindset is something that our survival system in our brain creates. When we're logical, when we look around and go, there's enough pie to go around for everybody. And that's when the thinking of beyond myself, what's good for everybody, realizing that if I seek that and everybody else seeks that, then everybody synergistically wins. But when we're under tremendous amount of stress, this little primitive brain, what I call a caged animal, overacts. It really starts getting really loud, and it makes it seem like I have to look out for number one. I got to protect myself. I got to have job security. I can't speak positively about this team member or give them credit because it makes me look less because they look so good. That's what stress does. It creates these awful comparison games. And that, how do you quantify that? How do you as a leader come in and quantify that number to be able to say, this is how much it costs my team? You can't. That's why stress management is so vital and important. And we have to really put a lot more priority. Hold on, I got a little Mancy here saying, this one is not an often guest on the show. He's just going to preschool right now. Okay.
So cute.
Well, and I don't know where I'm falling in the whole devil's advocate side of this thing, but it is what Anton talks about, and it's something that's just come to the forefront of the passion I have, is to help leaders find wisdom, because part of the concept of wisdom is looking at things outside of ourselves and to help others look at things outside of themselves. And it's such a key part. And one of the things that we do, I've got to put in a plug for what we do and how we go about it. And one of those things is we're helping people organizationally, individually, begin to seek out some wisdom about themselves and about their team. And that's where you have to be able to step back and look outside of yourself, also look outside of each individual to the team and back the other way. That's part of the art of being a leader and developing culture. And that is for some of us, that's a challenge, because like Anton mentioned, we're pretty logical and to the point of sometimes being a bit dry, but the art form of it sometimes has to go a little beyond logic. And it can be interesting at moments, and it's also risky, because if you go outside of logic and science, you have a greater possibility you might make a mistake, and that's okay, because that's where we can really bring in the human element of what we're doing and as part of our workforce. So
hit the next slide, Kev.
I'm not sure where I landed on that, but I did my best.
No, I mean, I'm just saying, when I say devil's advocate, I just want to throw a different thing. And that's why I love this team so much, guys. We really try to be, I hate to use the word authentic, but that's the reality. I think that we get a lot of fluff on social media about just love and all this. And I say this story all the time. I loved my people so much, I didn't properly take care of them, and I lost 5 of them in March 2015 because I didn't manage them. All I did was lead them and try to inspire them. But sometimes people need accountability. That's just the reality.
It goes hand in hand. You cannot be a motivational, inspirational person, and then when people are veering down the wrong path, you can't step in then and try to make them accountable. We talk about this all the time. When you bring somebody into a position, they need to know what the expectations are up front, and they need to know what accountability looks like.
Well, and I tell you, accountability has a bad reputation. Too often it's thought of a negative thing. But having really made an effort to understand what real love is about, and if you do a little homework, you begin to figure out that holding people accountable, if we're genuinely trying to see their best interest, that is the most loving, caring thing we can do. So it's not a harsh, negative thing, done well. Now, some people, I train leaders all the time that the best way to hold people accountable is not yelling, it's not throwing, it's not cursing, it's not all of these things, generally speaking. It is delivered and handled differently, but just as firm and strong, done well with compassion. And by the way, a shout out to Rania. Glad to have you with us, Rania. Rania's from Greece, and glad to have her aboard. First time she's joined us. So welcome.
Rania's been with us. But, to that point, there's a difference between accountability and micromanagement, and our inability to draw the line between the two, especially on the employee side. Employees oftentimes look at one as is the other, but they're not. A leader told me a long time ago, one of my mentors, he said, accountability is just part of business. Micromanagement is the first step to an exit interview. And we have to understand that. There's times that I might need to micromanage somebody as a leader because they're failing, they're not doing things, and I really have to come in, and maybe they're on a PIP, performance improvement plan. On the performance improvement plan, I'm going to micromanage, excuse my French, but the crap out of you to make sure that everything is done as good as possible at your potential to keep you here. That's what I want to do in a performance improvement, because if you fail in a performance improvement plan, it's not your fault. It's my fault as a leader. I didn't come up with a good plan. I didn't, hold you accountable properly, or in that case, micromanage you a little bit. But it's all designed, I always look at it. I talk about this all the time, a volume knob, right? Somebody's in a performance improvement plan, their accountability is to a point of micromanagement. That volume knob is turned up all the way. As their performance starts to improve, you start to turn it down. And you start to take that and bring it to as little accountability as possible from my end, and a lot more personal accountability on their end. And the difference is, here's what you're going to do versus what do you think is possible and how are you going to do it, right? Like that's just a conversation. You can lead as an effective leader to the same goal for the team member. It's just how you go about getting there is going to be different. But the massive difference is the buy-in that team member has into that goal, and the amount of work and the extra work they're willing to do to reach it. And that's the problem that I see with a lot of people when setting goals, especially in sales. They're like, here's your goal. Here's your goal. We have this budget. I'm going to divide it by this number of people, and everybody has that goal. It's a terrible way of doing it. People have different capabilities, different things going on in the month and a year. So we should be aligning to that. A couple of shout outs here. Olga said, stress is uncontrollable thoughts. We live a little too much in our heads. Absolutely. We talk about 3-bucket exercises, kind of how to organize your thoughts, what's controllable, what's influential, and what you just need to let go. But if somebody's familiar with the concept of flow is something that Red Bull studied a lot of psychologists have been studying, but it's when we can just enter this state where we're at our best at this specific task and nothing else matters. So the quote is, anxiety is thoughts without control. Flow is control without thought. And then just think about that, right? That's what happens when we're not in our head so much. We're just acting. We're relying on our intuition. We're relying on what our body knows subconsciously, not always materializing into a full thought, and we're just making it happen. But if you're not managing stress, you're always going to be on the other end with the state of anxiety. You will never, ever, ever, ever be, and I will say this 100% confidence, if your body's overstressed, you will never enter a state of flow. Your brain will not allow you to, because of the thoughts in your head. And the other comment here, that is a reality into the picture you just painted. It's what I see many of my friends, colleagues live every day. And he's talking about, when we were mentioning, the social aspect of stress and what it does to our minds. And guys, if you want to learn more about this, check out polyvagal nerve theory. It's a lot of science, but you can actually get like a little image on Google, and it'll show you how we have these 3 stages. We have our kind of relax, recover stage. Then we get into our go system, which is our perform stage. But then if we stay there too long, we go into the freeze stage. And that's kind of how those social interactions happen.
Anton, we've got a comment from Sharon. We'll pop that up. It says, wise words of wisdom. I had a micromanager, made me crazy. She gave me something to do, then wasn't happy because if she didn't do it, it wasn't good enough. I got to a point where I asked, what do you need me here for if you don't listen to any of my ideas and only your idea is good enough, but no one else's? Yeah, that is so powerful, Sharon, because one of the keys to being an effective leader is to let go, okay? And give somebody an assignment or a task and make sure it's appropriate for them. That's one of the key elements. And then let them take it. They may not do it the way I would do it, but if they get it done to the end goal or to the vision in the matter, then stay out of the way. That is, and it comes to a word that I share with leaders all the time. I watch leaders burn out because they have no concept of how to be effective in delegating. And I tell you what, as a leader, and if you're trying to build a culture like we're talking about, you need to be about delegating as much and as often as possible. If you don't, by the way, you'll end up doing everything yourself, and your stress level is going to be so out the roof that your team's going to come in and find you in the corner of the office some morning, and you're going to be effectively a goner.
Double D, development and delegation, right? Trust enough to delegate, and then be good enough yourself and create the opportunities to develop them. Because I think that's the big piece that's missing in leaders. I don't expect an employee to do things the right way, from the start. I don't expect them to do it the right way maybe in the next couple of times. What I expect is I want to see marginal improvement from each time that they're doing it, and that the feedback that they received and the development that they received was able to be applied, and some takeaway made from that, right? And too many leaders don't know how to coach. That's the reality. I've seen too many people do delegate and they do give it away. Then they're always unhappy because it ends up coming out the same way over and over, and they're just expecting it to change. I'm like, what's changing that you're expecting this result to change? Just because they've done it more times doesn't mean they exactly know how to do it right, or more importantly, how to do it how you want it to be done. So you have to be an effective coach and an effective developer to delegate effectively. So this picture here, guys, this is in a nutshell. I'm a big fan of visuals and analogies. These guys hear analogies all the time. Some of them make sense, some of them don't, but they all make sense in my head. And this is just the common mistake that stress management and really organizational stress management does right now. When you look at here, you have a couple different things. You have the faucet itself, which is your life, your work, and your health, which is the things that are ultimately contributing stress to your existence, to your human operating system, your workplace, whatever it may be. The water is the stress and our perception of it, right? How we look at it and ultimately how much of it is. The bucket is the stress capacity that we have, that our mind, body, and spirit possess. Each of those three things can be impacted. So life, work, and health, we can reduce unnecessary stressors. I'm never going to get rid of stress. It's not what I'm saying. Reduce the stuff that doesn't belong. So that way the stuff that does is able to be managed properly. We're not, paying attention to too many things at once. Stress in our perception, obviously we can change how we respond to the stress that we have. We can change our physiology and how it responds, which ultimately ties into our stress capacity. That's not just reactive. Your stress capacity is built proactively as resilience. When you create team member resilience ahead of time, ahead of these big stressors, ahead of closeouts, ahead of whatever it may be, their capacity increases, which means that they can take more water without overflowing. But what is that people always focus on? They focus on the valve. They focus on the valve on the spout, and they think all it's about is just turning that thing down. That's what stress management is for the most part in most organizations right now. How do we cut back, reduce the stress? But it's not feasible. Some people just can't do it. Some jobs can't do it. You're always on. So now you have to redistribute your focus to the other three components, which are much more controllable and can have a lot more done with them.
Well, but what you talked about earlier, Anton, that some people view stress more positive than others. So if you have a leader who believes that all you do is turn the valve off, you're negatively impacting people that don't view that as a stressor. And now they're wondering why we're doing things differently to address an issue that, Susie has over here that nobody else has, instead of talking to Susie and helping her deal with the issue. I mean, I see that all the time, unfortunately.
And it's an ability to custom tailor that approach. I think that it boils down to that leaders don't know enough. How do I adjust or manage Susie's stress versus how I adjust and manage Johnny's stress or Billy's stress? It's all going to be different. But when you only think about the valve as an option, of course, you're going to, for the most part, manage people with a formula. Here's the secret formula that fixes everything. Meditate every 30 minutes or once a day. Have walking meetings and a ping pong table, as Kevin likes to call it. And all of a sudden, everything is going to be great. No, it's not. You're going to spend a lot of money in the process, stress out people because you're going to invest time into things that don't want to invest it into. And a lot of times create a bigger problem than you did. And you actually created a cost instead of an investment. But when you custom tailor the approach, when you understand all the available inputs your people have, then you actually turn this cost into an investment and a long-term one at that.
That's why we have a mantra. Our mantra is manage things. You got to do that, but lead people. And your focus changes as you begin to do that. And it makes a difference. And the key is that as a leader of a team, it's your responsibility to manage those things. And that's going to probably require more of your time. And that's why leading people, if you've got the culture correct and you're doing things well, less of your time will be on leading people, because you've empowered, you've caused them to be in a role, in a position to do them, for lack of a better way to put it. That we talk about being ourselves. Well, that's the value of where being ourselves comes in, is that if we are put in the proper position, by the way, the role, the task, and then allowed to be who we're designed to be, then we don't have to, as a leader, spend so much time on that. So we can manage the things that affect our team and take that off of them, and it helps provide a culture that they can function in. And this is where, I'm sorry, I'm getting wound up here, but this is where the entrepreneurial spirit that people are so frightened of, leaders are so frightened of employees, becomes a great value, because then that drive, that desire to do things based on who we are and what we want to do, becomes an asset rather than a liability on our team.
We have a good comment from Tim here. He said, one management approach I have come up with includes 3 critical ingredients: asking questions to unlock the root cause analysis of overperformance. Love it. Number 2 is acknowledging in a timely manner. And then number 3 is inspiring. And I really like this one. He said, in parentheses, stretching people through assignments, extending boundaries of a person's role and responsibility. So many leaders miss this. When we mention the state of flow, your body does not enter a state of flow unless what's being asked of it is currently slightly outside of its current possibility or current capability. So as a leader, when you do that and you stretch through inspiring, that's what I love. That means to me, you're empowering them to step into that space versus forcing something on them they may not feel ready for it. And that's a great one, Tim. Definitely DM me, man. Let's get you on the show and talking about this stuff.
No, I think that's great. But I would also add that when you get them to a point to stretch, it's going to add a little bit of stress. Even though we know they can do it, even though we know it's the right thing to do, we're going to, trickle down a little bit more stress. And that's why we need to be aware of it and know what their stressor is or isn't, and how we can help them navigate to more productivity.
And as a leader, right, you're looking at their task as an example, right? And if you're added something new to their plate that may extend them a little bit, maybe you take something off. Maybe you step in and cover something for a little while, or have a, understudy or something like that take on. And you have to really pay attention to that. The last slide we're going to talk about today will really make sense when we explain the difference between being a thermostat and a thermometer. So let's get into the five topics real quick on how to manage your culture and how to do these things. There's lots of stuff out there. This is just our version. This is Prospective Force belief that these are the things that are going to make your culture have the right lens perspective on life, on work, on stress, on everything. And it starts with healthy team conflict. I just had an experience where I was on a team that was for school, and there was no conflict. Even though in the very beginning I said, guys, I'm kind of confrontational, like this and that. Like I like to be open so that way we can hash it out while we're having this conversation, not run into something later and cause inefficiencies. And I'm probably a little bit more on the course side, and everything was great. And there's just this greatness. Everybody's amazing. Everything's great. But when it came time to feedback, the feedback didn't match the experience. And it honestly pissed me off. Excuse my French, but it did. It made me so upset, because I'm like, look, guys, I told you my shortcomings in the beginning. I told you what I am and how to navigate it, but you told me, don't worry about it. It's fine. And then you beat me up in feedback for those things while you told me in the meetings that everything was good while I was asking for it. So it's a little bit of a tangent, but ultimately having healthy conflict is a good thing. they're thinking that everybody in a room thinks the same, feels the same, and agrees on everything just means that nobody's speaking their mind and nobody's being honest. Everybody, for whatever reason, be it the leader doesn't approve of it and they don't like to have confrontation, or just the space doesn't feel safe, whatever it is, I want conflict. When these guys disagree with me, I get excited. I'm like, yes, because now the view, the opinion, the route that we're taking is going to be that much better because we've hashed out numerous perspectives and we finally arrived at the one that's most agree on, whatever it may be.
Yeah, people are passively aggressive with conflict, that they avoid it at all costs, but then within feedback or in conversations with other colleagues. And I don't do drama, and I have a problem with that. I mean, I truly do. Conflict to me means that you're coming into a conversation knowing that we're going to have different viewpoints and opinions, and that's okay. I'm going to speak my mind. I'm not going to challenge or jump on you when you disagree with me. We're going to openly listen to one another. And then we're going to figure out the best path forward. That's how to handle, in my opinion, conflict effectively. Mm-hmm. It's not just, coming to the table and, my favorite episode of the Seinfeld airing of grievances, you just don't dump it all on the table and walk away. That's what we're talking about.
Yeah, the healthy conflict cannot allow for winner takes all environment, because that's what happens so often with conflict. Well, whoever's the last man standing is the winner and they're the victor. No, that's not the way it works. That's an unhealthy approach.
So if you can't say the statement on the screen 100% all the time, chances are there's stress that's happening on your team and culture is being impacted by that. And you really are getting solutions that are not as good as they can be because you can't accurately hash out opposing ideas and find balance between the two. So next one, and this one is a huge culture killer, managing turnover. Right? When you have a team that's been together for a long time, you as a leader have had time to work out some of the kinks, to create some alignments, whether it be vision, values, whatever it may be, right? You taught people to communicate a certain way. And really, what I love to do is I love as a leader for people to know how I think. That's one of my favorite things that I can accomplish on a team. If my team knows the answer to the question before I even answered it, right? They don't even have to come to me to get that answer. They just operate, they create initiative because they're aligned on this global thing that we're doing. So turnover will kill that, because every time you do that, not are you having to build the person up to that level that everybody's at with your culture, but you're also introducing almost like a foreigner, right? You're introducing what we call about ecosystem. It's a foreign organism that's coming into your environment. And the more times that happens, the more likely that a potential cancer can be introduced. And guys, and if we're going to say that there's no cancerous employees, I'm going to argue that. I think that there are absolutely bad employees. They're rare. And sometimes bad employees happen because of bad leaders. But sometimes you can do everything right as a leader and still get a bad employee. The more your turnover is, the more likely it is that will occur.
All right, so a couple of things here. First of all, the law of a bad apple. One bad apple spoils everybody, so you have to identify that. Turnover, though, I want to push on that one a little bit, because we talked earlier about delegating and developing your team. We talked about trusting them to do their job. We talked about pushing them to, at some point, they outgrow the organization, and you have to be okay with that. And so turnover, there's two sides to turnover. I mean, you have to be open and understand that people are going to outgrow your company, because you can't continue to give them the promotion. You can't continue to give them what they want. And you have to bless and release them to their higher good. You've done what you could do to develop them. They served the purpose as a team, and they're going to move. And so why development of others is so important is when somebody grows out of the company, you have another person to backfill, which keeps, so turnover isn't always a bad thing.
We may need to adjust our verbiage a little bit to talk about controlled and uncontrolled turnover.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Or positive and negative turnover, right?
There you go.
Some uncontrolled turnover still can be positive because people are leaving your company to go take a promotion. It's uncontrolled because we didn't know what's coming. But it's still a positive because we've done our job as a leader to advance them in their future, and it'll pay dividends in the long run.
And I'm going to throw out a teaser here. I'm not going to dive into it because of our time, but one of the concepts that plays into this, what we've been talking about here, is called group dynamic. And as a leader, if you do not understand that concept, this is going to be a real challenge for you about adjusting your team, because when you adjust your team, whether intentional or unintentional, it changes the group dynamic, and knowing how to work with that becomes very important. So
guys, is turnover relatively low to your industry, right? Compared to your industry, that's something that's important. You have to understand your industry. There's some industries that have 75% average turnover. Like, that's just life. A lot of sales, a lot of those kind of, especially external sales, have super high turnover. Your job is not to make it zero. Your job is not to make it, be very small. Your job is to be a little bit better than your industry. And you'll see, just by being 10 points, whatever points you're better than your industry, you're going to have a massive competitive advantage. It's just going to happen. I don't know. I attribute most of my leadership success to cutting turnover minimally in half with every team I worked with. But also I understood that there was such thing as needed turnover, right? There's times where you're bad apples. They're going to keep dragging the team down. It's like a dead weight that you carry with yourself everywhere you go. And sometimes you have to let them go and release them, not just for your sake and the other people on your team, for their own sake. Sometimes people don't realize that this is not for me. They're just afraid to venture out there and look for something else. So they get stuck in places that are just miserable and they're not performing in, but it pays the bills. Sometimes it's let them get them out.
That's where we say amen, amen.
And Anton, something I want to remind folks, these statements that we use are in our assessment, and they are part of symptomology of issues. They're not the root cause. And what we do for you, for your team, is to come in once we've identified the symptoms, and we can begin to help you find what the root cause is. That's where we're strong and what we are good at and enjoy doing a great deal. So
let's hit the next one. We got 3 left to get through here real quick. Team motivation through aligned values. And guys, we could cover each one of these for, a couple hours worth, but just real quick, ask yourself, team members know and exhibit organizational values and vision, right? Then we can also expand that question to where there's alignment between organizational and personal. That's really when you start to win. When they can do this, that's great. But when those visions and missions align in some degree, we've talked about this, that don't have to be a perfect alignment. Even if it's aligned for a little period of time and then they fork away, great. For that period of time that we're aligned, let's make this be the best time possible for all parties involved, right? So that's key, guys. And I think we'll spend a lot more time in the future. I just want to make sure that they're clear, they're established, people know them, but they don't just know them, they live them and exhibit them, and somehow the leader rewards them. Not from, here's a gift card. It's intrinsic rewards work best when they're not known ahead of time. And I'm telling you, it's so amazing. It's going to be so cheap. You grab a book that's relevant to what you saw a team member do well. You buy it, you come to them randomly on the floor or whatever you see them and you say, hey, I've seen you do this so well. I wanted to pick this up for you because I think that you could really turn this skill that you have into an amazing thing that can help the rest of the team. And I'd love you to present this to the rest of the team in a future meeting when you feel ready. Is this something you'd be willing to do? That person is just going to get lit. They're going to get so, for the most part, some people won't because they're introverts, but that's why you ask. But a lot of people, even introverts, they'll get so excited for that recognition that came out of nowhere, and the book will advance them further, and then they get to develop others without you as a leader really spending more time than that one conversation.
And I would I'm sorry, Kevin, go ahead.
I was just going to say, as a leader, if you have no clue what your team members' vision is and their values, you are in trouble.
Yeah. And then from a culture perspective, and again, where the word alignment is much better than agreement, is that from a culture perspective, if they know that they can live with some level of alignment with the values and vision, that's better than coming in and saying, to work here, you must believe in X, Y, and Z. And sometimes the X, Y, and Z pops up in their second or third year of employment.
Mhm.
And that,
Shared vision is your most extreme motivator there is. If you share vision, the organization vision and personal vision, and they're shared, wow, get out of the way. People are going to make good.
So next one is inclusive and diverse ecosystem, right? Part of the culture aspect and something that creates a ton of stress is lack of D&I. I mean, it's just diversity and inclusion, and leaders do this a lot of times unintentionally. It's just truly lack of awareness. But the more older our society becomes, the more mixed we become. The more global we become, the more mixed we become, right? And it's only going to make us better. But if you don't know how to be inclusive and diverse as a culture in your organization, how to communicate that way, how to create events that way, how to, reward people that way, it goes into so many ways. You're going to create problems. And these ones are usually silent. These are the ones that people don't talk about. So this one's interesting. Make sure that your employee surveys are somehow able to be broken down by demographic. And this is very common that I see from companies is they get, whoa, we have an 80% satisfaction survey. Great. Seems like 80% of our team members are satisfied. But what if that 20% is from one demographic? What if the rest of that is really just one demographic is fully unsatisfied, but you're looking and lumping everybody together and going, well, 80% of employees are satisfied. Can't make everybody happy. I'm not an ice cream maker. Well, you're not looking at it the right way. You got to break them down in segments and see statistically how is every segment experiencing, the working environment. Why are we silent? Why did I just?
No. I mean, I agree. But then my brain was going back to earlier shows that we had where what we're talking about is not a checkbox on a form. You're not checking a box to make sure that when you're hiring people, check. You want to bring the best team together, and you want to be open to having a diverse team.
Yeah, we're not saying have like 3 of this race, 3 of this gender, and then fit what you can. You're putting limitations on everything.
Yeah.
But you're spot on, Kimberly. I agree with that. Like, build it because of the best people, but make sure that you don't carry some sort of a bias that you brought from somewhere else in that process. Because truly, if we do that, we should not do that. We should end up with a very diverse and inclusive environment because there's people that exist of all colors, all genders that are effective at what we need. But our personal biases oftentimes create a roadblock to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's get into what we got. Last one.
And diversity, by the way, also includes generational diversity.
Mm-hmm. I mean, look at our team, right? There's so much that perspective that we disagree on or expand on because of the generational diversity. So last one, guys. This one of my favorite.
I think you just called us old.
I could be the older generation. I didn't say that.
Hey, Kimberly, the truth hurts sometimes, doesn't it?
I know.
You're not old. You're not old. It's like we're living forever these days, and people keep saying we're going to live to like 120 now. So you're not even like halfway point. Scary, right? So here's the last point, guys. This is what I see and why cultures are not able to be built, why cultures are not the right lens on stress and the right perspective on stress, because people are always reactive. Leaders are reactive. They're there as thermostats. They're there and they basically read the temperature, and usually by that point it's too late, and then they finally react to it. So I should say thermometer. A thermostat sees the change starts to occur and starts to shift and change the temperature before it gets too late, before it gets super high or super low. It adjusts based on what it reads versus just being able to read. This is what I see a lot of leaders becoming, is they're really good at, identifying problems. Well, this is that one's fault. This is that one's fault. This is the problem. But what were you doing when you saw the early signs? What were you doing when stress was starting to become a problem? Not now that it's already overflowing and we have issues everywhere. That's what you have to be in a modern world. You have to learn how to identify these things early on and start to shift before it becomes too bad of a problem.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love this example. And sometimes, I mean, in my past, I knew of a leader who, for lack of a better way, he put his head in the sand. He avoided all the problems until it got to the boiling point, until it was so far gone, he couldn't bring it back in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's tough to dig out of the holes that we create for ourselves, right? And in a world that's super fast paced, in an environment that's so highly stressed, can't do that. Like, you have to understand, your people, it's like they can bend a lot. Just don't want them to break. You want to get to the point where they're bending and you address it and you fix it. But once they're broken, the difference to come back from that, we're not talking about weeks or months. We're talking about months or years. Like, the time that it takes to come out of that hole is just so much longer. And that's why you have to be a thermostat.
Wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, wisdom. We've got to be able to use wisdom. And part of what we do is help leaders, organizations find wisdom in terms of their team and stress and culture.
Guys, don't guess. Go to prospectiveforce.com right now. Everybody, if you got 10, 15 minutes to do, go to prospectiveforce.com. There is a very front page. There is a quick 12-question quiz. If that quiz you score poorly on, it means you're not managing your stress well, and you'll get a full 60-question assessment also free, guys. We're trying to create a movement. We're trying to show where these problems connect. So by just seeing these symptoms and connecting to the problem, I promise you're going to be like, well, I didn't realize that my gut health had to do with stress, or I didn't realize that my risk taking had to do with stress. You'll see some of these things in there. So just go take the assessment and you'll get some information after you're done on how to correct it.
And that's going to wrap it up. We are up against the clock. We'll be back next week. Come back, join us. Come with your comments, your questions. We'd love to hear them and address them and engage on them. Thanks, everyone. 11 o'clock Tuesdays at Eastern Daylight Time.
We're talking performance management next week, guys. Performance management.
Glad to have everyone here today. Thank you so much. Take care. God bless, and have a great rest of your week.